You know, it's my great pleasure right now to introduce to everybody a man who really needs no introduction.
Carl, Dragon King.
I'm not calling the fans geeks. I'm not calling them rednecks, tobacco chewing nothing, because I've done all that myself.
Carl, Dragon King. Carl.
In your dreams, you will see me. Excuse me, please, let's don't talk negatively. I'm going to win the title, I'm going to keep my money and buy me some good old Tennessee drinking whiskey with it.
Thank you for being such a great husband.
And this is for you, Fannie Mae. Solid gold, baby, just like you and me.
Hey, everybody, and welcome to the 1,000 Hours Podcast. I'm Carl Stern, your host. Thank you very much for joining me. This is hour number 70 of 1,000 Hours. Very happy to have gotten this far. Very quite proud of myself, quite honestly, for making it this far. And a long way still to go, actually. Who knows what stories we'll uncover about the pioneer era of pro wrestling, even here on this show today. So thank you all very much for supporting us. We've actually had a couple new Patreon signups since our last show, so I'm very grateful to you for that. And I have dedicated an hour each to those new signups, and that's how this show keeps going. You keep this show alive by becoming a Patreon supporter at whenitwascool.com, or you can even make a donation independent of Patreon on the front page of my website, whenitwascool.com, and hope you'll all bookmark that site and join me there. This podcast is produced and distributed by whenitwascool.com. So whenitwascool.com goes away, so does Carl. So let's try not to let that happen. And hey, look, our $5 sign up. Goodness gracious, I went to Sonic today to get a meal with my beautiful wife Tanya from When It Was Cool, and $5, that ain't going to get you anything at the Sonic, I'll tell you that much. But it'll get you almost 3,000 podcasts, articles, books, and much, much more, right available instantly on our Patreon feed. Give us a month, give us a chance. I think you'll love it. So let's get into our 1,000 Hours podcast. It's all about the pioneer era of pro wrestling. We last left off with the incredibly bizarre tale of John McMahon getting shot out in California, a story that was actually reported in the newspaper weeks before it happened in just a ridiculously serendipitous sort of way. A story about a wrestler named McMahon getting shot circulated nationally in newspapers a couple weeks before the real thing actually happened. It sounds like a work. It sounds crazy, but it was just a weird set of coincidences that led to that. You can hear all about that in the last episode. All right, so today's show is brought to you by Andy. Andy C. is one of our foundational Patreon supporters here, and he independently also donated to this show. So thank you very much, Andy, and this show's for you. You are a super valued member of our community and always have been. We're going to pick up in 1875, and we left off right after the John McMahon thing, so we're going to pick up in September. Talking about a day in infamy, September 11th. But this is back in 1875, San Jose, California. Less than a month after being shot following a wrestling match, John McMahon defeats R. Garnier in 1 hour and 40 minutes. He wrestled 3 weeks later, or a little over between 3 and 4 weeks later. After being shot and in critical condition, he wrestles an hour and 40 minutes. Now, they made these men differently, I'll tell you that. He won the match, too, for a reported $5,000. Almost all the newspapers are calling John McMahon the champion of America, even though actually Colonel James H. McLaughlin is at this point. But McLaughlin's gone to the railroad again. He's off being a train conductor. He had been putting challenges in the newspapers for a long time, not really having any success in anyone putting up the money to challenge him, so he goes to work. But the papers are looking for a champion. They want somebody to be champion. All these wrestlers back in the day want to be champion of something, were often billed as such. And so periodically, the newspapers themselves would just kind of deem somebody the champion, and they're starting to go that way with John McMahon here. Now, September the 22nd, 1875, San Francisco, California, John McMahon wrestles again, defeating Thomas Colligan for $2,000. October the 12th, 1875, we go across the country to New York City, and I've got a DragonKingKarl note for this listing as well. New York City, New York, the Grand Opera House. Now, remember, we're kind of between Madison Square Gardens at this point. The wall fell off one of them, and so we're between that. So some of these New York results will have different places. Grand Opera House attendance 2,000 people. The American Greco-Roman champion, Professor William Miller, defeated Andre Cristal 3-2. Now, many title history chronologies have this listed as the beginning of the American Greco-Roman Championship. And in my book, and this is all taken from my latest book, DragonKingKarl's Pioneer Era Pro Wrestling Omnibus, the Bible of the Pioneer Era of Wrestling, available at Amazon. Go to the front page of my website. You'll see links for it there, as well as all my omnibus books. So anytime you see something in bold in those books, you know that there's a deeper dive coming, a DragonKingKarl note, and we have one here for title history chronologies. Listen, let me be up front with you. I love title histories. I've spent many hours of my life reading through pro wrestling title histories. I applaud all of those who have done the research to compile these. I am a title history mark. However, title histories from the Pioneer Era are, sorry to say, essentially worthless. Sorry to break this to any title history fans like myself, but during the Pioneer Era, many wrestlers were billed as, quote, champion of something, usually America, whether there was any credence for it or not. Not only that, but the championships for that actually have a lineage, there were oftentimes multiple people claiming those same championships. Also, many title changes listed on the title history websites, Wikipedia, or books from the Pioneer Era were never called title matches or title changes by the newspapers when they reported these originally. Take any Pioneer Era title history with a huge grain of salt. I really wanted to publish in this very book, in my Pioneer Era book, the most literally correct lineage of the original American Collar and Elbow Championship, starting with Louis Ainsworth. I suppose information on Ainsworth proved quite hard to come by, and following through to Homer Lane and then to McLaughlin, but there were just too many questions and not enough legitimate answers to do so. Bravo to all you brave souls who try to publish Pioneer Era title lineages. And of course, you take my book and you can get a good idea of everything I could find in the newspapers about the Pioneer Era. And so someone that was of brave enough heart and soul to try to do that, you're welcome to do it. But I'm just taking the most, what I consider the best title histories, okay, or the Wrestling Title Histories book by Duncan and Will from back, okay, that book's 20-something years old now. Great Hisa's Puerto Rico Dojo, titlehistories.com website. It's great. To me, it's the one I trust the most here in 2025. But so many of the title changes listed therein from the Pioneer Era just do not have supporting factual evidence. Like, I'll go look up that date and find nothing. Look the dates, week before, week after, nothing. Or I'll find the match and it says nothing about a championship being at stake. It's just these Pioneer Era title histories were put together so long before we had good newspaper archive access like we do today. So many more newspapers are readily available online to search that weren't available, 25, 30 years ago. So you would expect, these days to have better source material, and you do. That's the reason I took so long to do this Pioneer book. I mean, it took me 30 years, I guess, to put it together. The current information is actually better information, but even with that, it's just nigh to impossible. These newspaper ads, they would just call somebody a champion just to, sell tickets or draw in gamblers to the matches. So many times with no no true evidence to support that claim. All right, October the 16th, 1875, the Fitchburg, Massachusetts Sentinel newspaper reports Harry Howard defeated Thomas Donahue for the Lightweight Championship of America in just over an hour for $100 a side. The location of the match was not mentioned, the venue. Or maybe it wasn't even in a venue. Maybe it was just times, the downtown square or something like that. October the 19th, 1875, going back over to the other side of the country, back to San Francisco, California. Our old friend and former champion Homer Lane, who spent much time out in New York working under Harry Hill, is now out in San Francisco. He defeated Richard Whalen in 2 out of 3 falls for $1,000. October the 29th, 1875, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, Assembly's Building, Andre Cristal defeated Emile Renier for $300. November the 9th, 1875, New York City, New York, at the Grand Opera House. The American Greco-Roman champion, Professor William Miller, fought to a draw with Andre Cristal in a match that lasted around 4 hours. And here we have another Dragon King Carl note, so let's deep dive into this. Greco-Roman, or Greco-Roman spelled differently, you can see in the book there, or Grecian wrestling, is a style of wrestling that is known and practiced worldwide. Greco-Roman wrestling was included in the first modern Olympic Games in 1896. Greco-Roman wrestling forbids holds below the waist, which results in an emphasis on throws, because a wrestler cannot use trips to bring an opponent to the ground or grab the opponent's leg to avoid being thrown. The Greco-Roman wrestling of the Pioneer era, however, was not exactly that. While resembling it in style, it was highly theatrical and often prearranged. The Greco-Roman style of wrestling used in the United States during the Pioneer era was largely introduced by the French wrestlers and was highly suspected of not having been legitimate in a lot of cases. Professor Theobald Bauer and Professor William Miller popularized this style of entertainment wrestling by touring across America in the 1870s. They ran lengthy promotional pieces about it in the newspapers. Once William Muldoon supplanted Bauer and Miller as the standard bearer for Greco-Roman wrestling in the 1880s, it gained a better reputation, partly because, instead of outright defrauding the public, William Muldoon toured the country putting on exhibition shows where he would explain the holds and throws of Greco-Roman and then demonstrate it. This turned Greco-Roman's reputation from being, quote, a put-up job to more of a tutorial on a scientific style of wrestling. The tone of the newspapers greatly changed once William Muldoon locked in his brand of Greco-Roman wrestling, and we'll go through that whole era coming up where William Muldoon gets involved and really does change how wrestling's looked at. I've talked several times here in this series about what, and been asked this many times, what Pioneer era wrestlers do I believe should be in the Wrestling Observer Newsletter Hall of Fame that aren't already? And most of the main ones are there. William Muldoon and Colonel James H. McLaughlin. I'm not sure about John McMahon. I'll have to check on him. But also, Farmer Burns from later in the era, Evan Strangler Lewis from later in the era, and all those are absolutely, correct. I think I'd need to make a case for Professor Theobald Bauer and maybe Professor William Miller, or maybe those two in conjunction. I'm not really sure how I need to go about it yet, because what we know as entertainment-style pro wrestling, the theatrics, and this isn't new. This isn't like something that come out in the 1980s or something. It's been, worked wrestling, well, as you can see, since the very beginning. But the style we know as entertainment wrestling, where we're not even really trying that hard to fool the crowd. We're going to say it's real, and everybody's going to play along with it. But come on, if you look close enough, you can tell. That's traceable mostly to Bauer and Miller, in my opinion. The others, yes, were working matches. McLaughlin and McMahon and the others, Homer Lane, they're absolutely working matches, but they're working it for a different reason. I believe they're working it to fleece gamblers out of money. Well, so are Bauer and Miller, but they have a secondary cause. They're selling tickets too. All of them are, but really the the Greco-Roman stuff becomes really primarily focused on ticket selling. So in William Muldoon greatly takes advantage of this when he comes along and becomes super popular. Look, there's been a few of these over time. They're the quote fake wrestlers. They're working wrestlers, but if it needs to be real, it can be. And we know about these throughout history. The last one was probably Brock Lesnar. Before that, you had Luthez. You had Ed Strangler Lewis, and so on and so forth. These wrestlers who 99 or more percent, perhaps even 100% of their matches were worked. But if it needed to not be, they could go that route too. And I think William Muldoon certainly fit in there as well. He did plenty of real matches, but he did lots and lots of exhibition matches as well. November the 24th, 1875, the first known pro wrestling event is held at Gilmore's Garden in New York City, New York. And it would eventually become the first Madison Square Garden. So here we are. This is actually before the wall fell off. I had previously posted that on This Day in History on my Facebook page. By the way, if you're not following our Facebook stuff, When It Was Cool has a Facebook page. I also have a Facebook page, Karl Stern, and we'd love to have you there. But yeah, here's the genesis of what would become Madison Square Garden. We've previously talked about this when P.T. Barnum owned it, but now it's Gilmore's Garden. A 3-night tournament, which included wrestling among other events, took place. Participating in the event were Andre Cristal, American Greco-Roman champion Professor William Miller, Professor Theobald Bauer, and others. Professor Theobald Bauer failed to throw Andre Cristal in the allotted time. November the 25th, 1875, more wrestling at Gilmore's Garden in New York City. Andre Cristal defeated Emile Reynier. The next day, at Gilmore's Garden, Andre Cristal defeated Jacques de Mortier. November the 27th, 1875, Gilmore's Garden again. We have Jacques de Mortier defeating Emile Reynier. Matt Grace defeated Andre Cristal. And attendance is said, we actually have attendance for this show, about 1,800 people. So that's probably about what size Gilmore's Garden was for seating people. There's probably around 2,000 maybe. And perhaps I'm wrong about it. Perhaps it's just bigger. But I would think wrestling with its level of popularity at this time in this building, I don't know if it's a sellout, but they probably did pretty well. December the 11th, 1875, New York City, New York, at the Grand Opera House, the World Greco-Roman title on the line. Professor Theobald Bauer defeated Andre Cristal 2-1. So here you see really both Miller and Bauer are both billing themselves as Greco-Roman champion, one of them the world Greco-Roman champion, the other the American Greco-Roman champion. And look, I'll be honest with you, it changes day to day, depending on what newspaper it's in. And sometimes, obviously, these newspaper ads were worked up, ahead of time, so a title change might occur before, after the ad was mocked up. But in most cases, look, it was the day you show up is the day they announce who the champion is back then. All right, Christmas Day, 1875, Brooklyn, New York, at the Charmont Avenue Rink. Attendance, quote, limited number of spectators, so that doesn't sound very good. American Greco-Roman champion Professor William Miller defeated Louis Cartillon 3-2. December the 29th, 1875, New York City, New York, Grand Opera House. Attendance, full capacity. So this is a big show. Don't know how many, but it says full capacity in the papers. Andre Cristal defeated Professor Theobald Bauer for the World Greco-Roman Championship. Then I have, as an unspecified date in 1875, Richard K. Fox is named the business manager of the National Police Gazette magazine, which was, of course, very, very important to pro wrestling. And especially, man, you get up in the Muldoon era, you get up to Frank Gotch, even Farmer Burns. They're all big names and covered heavily in the National Police Gazette, which was a very strange magazine. It's probably not what you think of. It's more of a tabloid than anything. It'd be more comparable to like the worst of the worst tabloids from the modern era. It's I don't know. Like it's not even really directly comparable to like a TMZ or something like that. It's more sensationalism, pulp almost. Weird magazine was National Police Gazette, and it's too bad there's not like a big archive of reprints or anything. I wish we could, because I'm betting there's a lot of lost information even about the pioneer era in those National Police Gazette magazines, but there are very few of them out there that you can have access to. I managed to get find a few, and I gleaned whatever I could out of those, but there's just a huge gap in the database of those, at least for now. So at this point in the book, we change eras, and I've tried to really delineate where wrestling kind of changed. So we've been talking about 1875 and backwards, and we're going to be talking about now going forward from 1876, where things change. And I've named this Era 5, the French Revolution and popularity of Greco-Roman. So this is, we've established now what Greco-Roman is. We've established the main players at this point in time, and the main players right now are Professor William Miller, Professor Theobald Bauer, and Andre Cristal. There are others that tag along, but those are your big three. Any of those three on any given night could be either the American Greco-Roman champion or the World Greco-Roman champion or who knows what. So 1876, we're going to start out in January, on January the 4th, 1876 in Detroit, Michigan, Whitney's Opera House, attendance 2,000 people. The actual American heavyweight champion, the collar and elbow champion, has come away from the train for a minute. Colonel James H. McLaughlin defeats Walter J. Benjamin. And so he picks up a rare win there because he's wrestling so seldom now. And he would do this. Look, McLaughlin would come and go from wrestling pretty regularly. January the 8th, 1876, Boston, Massachusetts, at Bumstead Hall, Professor Theobald Bauer defeated Professor William Miller for $600. The full number of falls were not fulfilled due to a curfew, and it was set to finish on the 28th, and it did so. We'll get to that in a moment. January the 17th, 1876, future world champion Fred Beal is born in West Prussia, Germany, and Fred Beal would be famous for upsetting Frank Gotch early in Gotch's career. It was really an outlier of a match. I mean, Fred Beal was a great wrestler, but he was much smaller, much thinner than Frank Gotch, and probably that seemed like a really worked match. It had the whole getting thrown out of the ring or off the stage, hitting your head on a object. I think he was thrown into an orchestra pit. They did that whole deal where, that's how Fred Beal won, by knocking out supposedly Frank Gotch. But interesting story. Fred Beal's interesting story. He, after his pro wrestling career, was a police officer there in Wisconsin and was killed in the line of duty as they come upon a burglary one night, and he was shot by the people committing the burglary. On January 22nd, 1876, New York City, New York, the Grand Opera House, attendance 2,000 people. Professor Theobald Bauer defeated Andre Cristal. January 24th, 1876, Vallejo, California, John McMahon defeated Homer Lane, his old touring buddy, 2 out of 3 falls in front of a small crowd. January 28th, 1876, this is the continuation of the match we talked about earlier, Boston, Massachusetts, Professor Theobald Bauer defeated Professor William Miller in a continuation of their Greco-Roman match on January 8th. This meant the two men split the matches and the prize money. And here I have another DragonKingKarl note for you. Greco-Roman wrestling is all the rage in America at this point. The work done by Professor Theobald Bauer and Professor William Miller on both coasts have been heavily covered in the newspapers. Even newspapers in areas which have not seen this version of Greco-Roman wrestling are running articles calling it a revival of the ancient Roman days. This French version of Greco-Roman wrestling had little to do with actual old Roman wrestling and was much more of a show style than the rougher collar, catch-as-catch-can or collar and elbow styles of wrestling. Okay, February 11th, 1876, Boston, Massachusetts at Revere Hall for the, quote, light heavyweight champion of England, Frank Robinson, defeated the Unknown. So there's that unknown gimmick. We've talked about this on past shows where they'll surprise you with somebody. It may be a ringer. In this case, it was Morris Callahan. Morris Callahan got beat 2 straight falls, catch as catch can. And there was also a demonstration of Ridgway's calcium light. So early experimentation of electric lights here. May have been the first. I don't know that they lit. I wish the newspaper would explain, because I tried to dig up several versions of the same newspaper story. Could this have been the first pro wrestling match under electric lights? Nobody ever said that. They said that all I could find was a demonstration of this early calcium light. But I think it was just there as a demonstration and not actually used for lighting the event. If it was, then this is your first wrestling match under artificial lights, and that's pretty cool. The February 12th, 1876, in Chicago, Illinois, at McCormick Hall, Andre Cristal defeated Jules Riegel when Riegel could not continue due to an injured arm. The match got heated during the first fall, and Riegel struck Cristal in the eye with his fist. The referee let the match continue, and Cristal won the first fall. Then Riegel quit during the second fall due to his arm injury. And this may have been the same Riegel over in France who did the whole gimmick with the masked man. It's possible. In fact, I would say probable this is the same person. All right, February 17th, 1876, go down to Troy, New York. Professor Theobald Bauer defeated M. Jean de Leon in Greco-Roman wrestling. A lot of French names in this, obviously. February 26, 1876, Boston, Massachusetts, Beethoven Hall. Professor Theobald Bauer defeated William Hegster in Greco-Roman. Hegster from Germany is said to have weighed 300 pounds and was undefeated. So here we have a DragonKingKarl note for Mr. Wilhelm Hegster, probably maybe a name you're not familiar with from the Pioneer era, but he's going to be named quite. He's a pretty regular wrestler. The big German Wilhelm the Oak of the Rhine Hegster. He must have been quite the attraction during this era. He was one of the troupe of wrestlers that Professor Theobald Bauer and Professor William Miller was using, and in an age where the newspapers regularly called people 6 foot 1 inches tall and 220 pounds giants, the 5'8", 300-pound Hegster must have stood out in the crowd. Almost certainly for sure. February the 28th, 1876, Cincinnati, Ohio, at Pikes Hall, Professor William Miller defeated Louis Cartillon in Greco-Roman wrestling. So let's take our mid-show break right now, because when we come back, we've got some DragonKingKarl notes right out of the gate, and we'll talk more about the explosion of Greco-Roman wrestling in America. What's Collar and Elbow going to do about it? Should even Colonel James H. McLaughlin be recognized as the American champion at this point, or should it be John McMahon? What happens, all that and much more, right after this. Hey everybody, this is Carl Stern from WhenItWasCool.com. I'm here to tell you about my new book, now available, DragonKingKarl's Pioneer Era Pro Wrestling Omnibus, the Bible of the Pioneer Era of professional wrestling. Pro wrestling didn't start with Frank Gotch. He didn't just appear out of the void to bring us entertainment-style professional wrestling. No, it was built on a legacy some 70 to 80 years old. That's what I'm going to talk to you about, an era of wrestling in America seldom ever discussed, never before in this detail. I have put 700 pages of information about the pioneers of professional wrestling, like William Muldoon, Colonel James H. McLaughlin, Professor Theobald Bauer, Clarence Whistler, William Miller, and so many more. Maybe some names you've never heard of before, maybe some you've only heard in passing. I will tell you the origins and evolution. Now available, Amazon.com, WhenItWasCool.com. All right, welcome back. I know I very often plug our Patreon page because it is the most important thing to keep this website and these podcasts going. We have a whole podcast network, and we do pop culture and retro pop culture as well. So if you're fans of, say, things like superhero movies, horror movies, stuff like that, we have lots of stuff about that as well. But we have three, I guess counting this one, 4 primary pro wrestling shows on our podcasting network. The Tuesdays, DragonKingKarl Classic Wrestling Audio Show, which has been around for many, many years at Observer. Then we have bi-weekly the 1,000 Hour podcast, but we also have 2 others. We have Southeastern Championship Wrestling Action News podcast hosted by Aaron Gartland, all about Ron Fuller's Southeastern Continental Wrestling promotion in Alabama. That's a free show on our podcasting network. And then Eric Dirty Dog Darcy has Wrestling with the Dog podcast, been going for over 400 episodes. It is a very slickly produced, great information in that show. It comes out every Friday, and it's also a free show over at When It Was Cool. So I hope you'll check those out as well. So let's dive back into 1876. We're going to pick up in March 5th, 1876, in Cincinnati, Ohio at Pike Hall. Professor William Miller defeated Louis Cartillon in Greco-Roman. That was the February 28th note. March 5th, 1876, it should be St. Charles, Louisiana. At St. Charles Theater, attendance was a very large audience. Jules Riegel defeated Emile Renier in Greco-Roman wrestling. Louisiana, St. Charles, and New Orleans, they were early on the wrestling train pretty much. I mean, not from the beginning. Certainly that was up in New York, Delaware, Massachusetts, up in that area, but it wasn't very long till wrestling was a regular happening out in San Francisco as well, middle of the country, St. Louis especially, Chicago. But also, I mean, it's seldom talked about, but New Orleans and Memphis were regular host cities for professional wrestling. All right, so here's a matter of fact. March the 11th, 1876, New Orleans, Louisiana, at Grunwald Hall. The attendance, several hundred people. Jules Riegel defeated Nestor Massé in Greco-Roman wrestling when Massé could not continue after being thrown in the first fall. March 12th, 1876, again, New Orleans, Louisiana, at the Globe Theater. Attendance is a full house. Jules Riegel defeated Emile Renier in Greco-Roman wrestling 2 out of 3 falls. And here we have a new DragonKingKarl note. And again, this is from my book, DragonKingKarl's Pioneer Era Pro Wrestling Omnibus. The French-led Greco-Roman wrestling craze is in full swing in America. Newspapers are enthralled with the romantic notion that this was the sport of the ancients and fit right in with the popularity of operas and the plays of the day. The French are putting on their Greco-Roman style of wrestling in New Orleans with Jules Riegel and Emile Renier, also in Cincinnati with Professor William Miller and Louis Cartillon, and in Boston and Chicago with Professor Theobald Bauer and M. Jean de Leon and others. The collar and elbow wrestlers, while still very popular, are having to compete for space in the newspapers with the popular in culture Greco-Roman wrestlers. Collar and elbow and catch-as-catch-can would continue to be popular through the Pioneer Era and be important components in the mixed-style matches which come later on. And the mixed-style matches is really one of my favorite eras of the Pioneer, where you start having, one fall will be in Greco-Roman, one fall will be in catch-as-catch-can, another fall will be in collar and elbow, and so on and so forth. And you get, I think, a better, at least even if they're worked, the fan can get better idea of who the best really is, instead of, hey, this guy's the best in this style or this guy's the best in another style. You get to mix them all up. And that's coming in a few years. March the 13th, 1876, Pontiac, Michigan. It's not at the site of WrestleMania 3 that's been torn down in recent years, the Silver Dome, but instead at Clinton Hall. And the attendance, not, whatever we've decided it is, 78,000 or 93,000 or whatever. Back then, in 1876, it was 75 people. Saw E.P. Harrington defeat George Spear 2 out of 3 falls. So I have a DragonKingKarl note. E.P. Harrington was said to be 28 years older than his opponent, and E.P. Harrington was a participant in the famous 1870 Detroit International Tournament, which we've talked a lot about on this house. In fact, if you're new joining us here and you're just picking up the Pioneer Era for the first time, maybe you saw these teasers for these shows and have wondered, I feel like I'm confident in saying there's no better source for information on the Pioneer Era than my Pioneer Era Omnibus book. But we've talked many times here on 1,000 Hours about this 1870 Detroit International Tournament. And it was still, even to this, 10, 12 years later, it's the standard by which wrestling is judged, quite honestly. So March the 21st, 1876, St. Louis, Missouri, Temple Hall, large audience. World Greco-Roman champion Professor Theobald Bauer defeated Andre Cristal in Greco-Roman wrestling. So either for this occasion or in between, this supposed World Greco-Roman title is bounced back to Bauer. Who knows? I mean, these newspaper ads are calling everybody champion. On this same day, March 21st, 1876, Eureka, Nevada, Homer Lane defeated V.B. Sabine for the Championship of Nevada and $500 in the collar and elbow style. March 23rd, 1876, back to where it all started, Detroit, Michigan, the Detroit Opera House, attendance 3,000 people. American collar and elbow champion Colonel James H. McLaughlin wrestled Jacob H. Martin to a disputed draw. One of the falls was contested as having not been a fair fall, and one of the judges was accused of having placed wagers on McLaughlin. Ultimately, McLaughlin was declared the winner of the majority of the purse, but it ended up being split 2/3 going to McLaughlin, while 1/3 went to Martin. They got caught working a match. I mean, it's simple as you can put it here. They got caught on a gambling scheme, and that's the best way out they could do with. But this Jacob H. Martin, he's a real thorn in the side to McLaughlin. Nobody's even giving McLaughlin any competition. He's bulldozing these people until this guy who we know really very little about. I've got a photo of him in the book as an older man, Ypsilanti, Michigan. That's where he was from. He's in this photo. You can't tell about people in the 1870s. He looks like he's about my age, 54, 55 years old in this, but he's probably 18 years old, in 1876, way people looked older back then. But Jacob H. Martin, we never really hear that much about him. He wasn't like, he doesn't have like a tobacco card in his honor or anything like that. But, man, he was the guy giving McLaughlin a run for his money back then. All right, March 24th, 1876. With Greco-Roman wrestling growing in popularity throughout the country, the president of Harvard University bans it from the school, declaring it to be too dangerous. So, more things change, more they stay the same, right? Always, you got to stay ahead of that. Oh, this wrestling's dangerous. It's fake now. Y'all know it's fake, right? But it's dangerous. That was happening all the way back in 1876, and there's plenty more examples over the next, 150 years or whatever. April 1st, 1876, no fooling, St. Louis, Missouri, the Temple, Professor Theobald Bauer defeated Wilhelm Hegster in Greco-Roman wrestling match. Actually, that probably was an April Fool's match there. April 21st, 1876, White Pine, Nevada, the Nevada state champion, Homer Lane, defeated Jerry Barker in collar and elbow. And look, Homer Lane's going to sit up out there in Nevada for a long time, for many years. He was a big star, successful, and the top champion in pro wrestling around 1870 out on the East Coast around New York, working with Harry Hill. He goes to the other side of the country, San Francisco, working with John McMahon out there, does very well, and sits up in Nevada for a while. So Homer Lane was a real traveler, and he ultimately ended up back on the East Coast, in New York wrestling as well. Homer Lane had one of maybe the longest career of any of the bigger name or bigger known Pioneer era wrestlers. Don't know exactly how old he was when he died. Don't know his date of birth. Nobody seems to know. It's not on his tombstone or anything else. No sources in the paper, nothing I could find. So know when he passed away, but don't know when he was born. So can't really say. But goodness, seems like he had at least 40 years in wrestling, maybe 35 to 40 years in wrestling. That's remarkable. April the 21st, 1876. The 22nd, 1876. New York City, New York, at Central Park Garden. The American Greco-Roman light heavyweight champion Henry Howard defeated William J. Austin in 3-1. April 24th, 1876, Brooklyn, New York, at the Rink. Greco-Roman wrestling, William J. Austin defeated Lucian Mark. Okay, We know all about Lucian Mark. He's the knockoff Andre Cristal, worker of the carny of the highest level. Greco-Roman rules, Louis Cartillon defeated M.M. Soleil, 2 falls to 1. April 25th, 1876, Chicago, Illinois, New Chicago Theater, Wilhelm Hegster defeated Andre Cristal, 2 falls out of 3. We talked about Fred Beale earlier. He's just a little bit older than the man, born April 27th, 1876, none other than Frank Gotch, born in Humboldt, Iowa. So if you wondered what was the world like who did Frank Gotch grow up reading about in the papers or perhaps even seeing wrestle live somewhere? Well, we're about to see. He's just born here, so, for the next, 17, 18 years, these are the people he would have heard about, met, studied perhaps along the way. He's born into a real weird world. I mean, obviously he's too young to study this at the moment, but he's born into a world where pro wrestling is largely worked, very largely worked. And he's actually going to bring it back to a more legitimate level when Gotch comes along. Now, it takes a few years, and I think probably rightfully Strangler Lewis had a lot to do with carrying it back to its more carny roots, but the work never left wrestling. I mean, there's been times where it has, maybe not even been in the majority of the matches being predetermined, but it's always been there. It's always been there. If there's anything my research has uncovered, if there's anything you can glean with certainty from the Pioneer Era Pro Wrestling Omnibus, wrestling didn't start being fake in the 1930s or 1940s. It was worked 75 years before that. All right, April 28th, 1876, the newspapers report that a rematch between Jacob Martin and Colonel James H. McLaughlin has failed to be agreed on when Martin wanted a guaranteed portion of the gate money to compete. The editors said that McLaughlin was right in his refusal to split money up front because it would cause a question of the legitimacy of the match. Well, the match probably wasn't going to be legitimate anyway, but, the newspaper people and all that may not have known that. April 29th, 1876, Chicago, Illinois, at the Chicago Theater, Professor Theobald Bauer defeated Wilhelm Hegster in Greco-Roman wrestling, 2 out of 3 falls. May the 6th, 1876, we go to St. Louis, Missouri, to the Temple, attendance 1,000 people. Professor Theobald Bauer defeated Julius Schroeder in Greco-Roman wrestling. You see, they're just dominating the papers. Nobody here in 1876, 1875, 1876, very few people are talking about what's happening with John McMahon, Homer Lane, Colonel James H. McLaughlin. They're not talking about collar and elbow wrestling anymore. They're talking about Greco-Roman. It's captured the imagination. But as is the case with a lot of things, and you go through the years, you think about the boring as paint drying matches of like the 1930s and 1940s. You had to entertain that up for TV, and it ran its course. You think about hardcore wrestling from the 1990s specifically. Well, it ran its course, and Greco-Roman wrestling is going to run its course. They're going to run it literally into the ground. So here, May the 8th, 1876, New York City, New York, Germania Assembly Rooms, Greco-Roman, Lucian Mark defeated William J. Austin. May the 11th, 1876, Brooklyn, New York at the Olympic Theater, Michael John Dwyer, we've talked about M.J. Dwyer before, defeated Professor William Miller in a boxing exhibition. He was also a boxer. So was William Miller. There were several of these crossover boxer wrestler types. Then in Greco-Roman wrestling matches, Steve Taylor defeated George Rook, and W.J. Austin defeated Professor Ozard. Yes, lots of professors. And I get periodically asked this question as well, very good question. What were these people professors of? Did they go to Oxford and, get a doctorate in, physics or something to become? No, look. These were gimmick names. They were professors of physical culture or professors of, the human anatomy or something like this. Wasn't legit. Professors of wrestling, You yourself could be a professor. I should be the professor of wrestling, quite honestly. The only one I know of, anyway, court-certified expert in pro wrestling, state of Georgia, in state of Georgia versus Turner Sports. I was named a pro wrestling expert in order to garner statistics for a lawsuit that WCW found themselves in a couple decades ago. I should be professor instead. May the 16th, 1876, Brooklyn, New York, at the Howell and Cushing Circus. Professor William Miller defeated Michael John Dwyer in Greco-Roman wrestling. So, yep, they're even doing it at the circuses, as you can imagine. May 22nd, 1876, New York City, New York, at the Parisian Varieties. Greco-Roman wrestling, William J. Austin defeated Lucian Mark. May the 25th, 1876, Port Huron, Michigan, in front of a sparsely attended, sparse audience, the gate of only $106. Jacob Martin, this guy I was just talking about against McLaughlin, he defeated J.C. Hadley. The newspapers said this match was an obvious fraud. Again, 1876, very few people, I guess unless you're one of the gamblers and just want to believe, very few people believe pro wrestling to be legitimate, especially Greco-Roman. May 29th, 1876, Cincinnati, Ohio, Professor Theobald Bauer defeated Wilhelm Hegster 3 out of 5 falls for $500. See, it's just the Greco-Roman stuff is just completely taken over. Now, in just a moment, we're going to shift over to collar and elbow, and we're going to shift over talking about John McMahon and Colonel James H. McLaughlin in a weird story, very carny story. You definitely want to stick around for that one. June 12th, 1876, Boston, Massachusetts, at Music Hall, good attendance. Professor William Miller defeated Michael John Dwyer in Greco-Roman. The newspaper said this was for the, quote, so-called championship of the United States. So the newspapers are starting to get burned out on all this. Everybody being a champion. This obviously entertainment-styled Greco-Roman wrestling. All right, so here's the story I just was promoing here. This is great. This is very pro wrestling. June 13th, 1876, a very strange story out of San Francisco, California. By way of the Silver State newspaper, Winnemucca, Nevada, this was later reported in the Los Angeles newspapers as well. It claimed that a match between John McMahon and Colonel James H. McLaughlin was set to take place the night before at Platt Hall, but police arrested both men for failing to have a license. All right, so a lot of red flags already. We know McLaughlin, the very few times he's even wrestling, is wrestling around Detroit and the East Coast, where he runs a train between the two places, and he's the American champion. He shouldn't even be out in San Francisco, and these are literally the two biggest stars of the day in collar and elbow wrestling. Why has there not been a single newspaper report about this upcoming match? They had advertisements anytime there was wrestling in San Francisco. The paper was covered up with advertisements for it. Nothing. There's been nothing about this. Nothing about them being arrested either, except this one article. So what the heck's going on here? McLaughlin had no such match planned, as he was back in Detroit preparing for a rematch with Jacob Martin. One would think a planned match between the two biggest stars of the era would have been heavily advertised in the newspapers, but it wasn't. Perhaps this was a play for publicity by John McMahon, who had been largely out of the spotlight since January. And, of course, no match ever took place. They only wrestled 3 times. John McMahon, Colonel James H. McLaughlin. McMahon won once. McLaughlin won another time, and then they went to a draw the third. So, it was essentially a draw between the two in the Pioneer era. None of those in San Francisco, I don't believe. June 19th, 1876, Emil Clank was born in Chicago, Illinois. Now, Clank was a wrestler in the early 1900s who barnstormed with Martin Farmer Burns, Frank Gotch, and others. And for a period of time, he worked as Frank Gotch's manager. So you see all these, Fred Bill, Frank Gotch, now Emil Clank, they're all being born right in this time period. This is the world of wrestling they're being born into. June 24th, 1876, Baltimore, Maryland. Professor Theobald Bauer defeated Wilhelm Hegster 3 out of 5 falls in Greco-Roman wrestling. June 29th, 1876, Detroit, Michigan. Whitley's Opera House, attendance, very large crowd. The American champion, Colonel James H. McLaughlin, battled Jacob H. Martin to a draw. Yes, McLaughlin's beating everybody, but for whatever reason, he's having a hard time with Jacob Martin. Match lasted from 10:40 p.m. to 6:30 a.m. with no falls taken. That is 7 hours and 50 minutes, in case you're keeping up with it. A lot of times people mistakenly believe these multi-hour matches had to be legit, and many times they were. But there's also a lot of times that they're not. They're taking that long for legitimacy. They're taking that long to swing the betting the direction they need it to go. Maybe the betting's supposed to be on McLaughlin, but it's all going to Martin, and we've prearranged this for McLaughlin to win, and 5 hours into this, the betting's still on the wrong person, so they got to fix the match to, make people think Martin was going to win. It'd be things like that. Now, I don't know if this match was legit or not, but it's interesting. It's interesting that Martin is always holding McLaughlin, He doesn't beat him, never beats him, but he's giving him a time. July 6th, 1876, Dallas, Texas, at Fields Theater, Emile Rainier defeated Jules Riegel in Greco-Roman wrestling 2 out of 3 falls. July 15th, 1876, Baltimore, Maryland. Yes, a hot spot for wrestling in the pioneer era. Ford's Opera House, attendance 1,500. Professor Theobald Bauer wrestled American Greco-Roman champion Professor William Miller in a match that became, quote, so violent that the police shut it down. After swapping 2 falls each, Miller became angry and challenged Bauer to a fight instead, and the police stopped the match. Again, those two worked together all the time. They also probably fought a lot all the time, too. There's some questionable stuff that happened between Miller and Bauer, including them splitting up for a long time, that makes me believe that much like later with William Muldoon and Clarence Whistler, they worked a lot of matches, but, man, it was just right below the surface that this thing was going to go off. So that too, makes for some interesting stuff, I would say. All right, so I think what we're going to do is we're going to pause right there for this week. Patreons, you can stick around. Patreon supporters at When It Was Cool. I'll be right back after the end here, and we'll discuss a little bit more. Now, we're not going to go any further in our timeline, so if you're listening to 1,000 Hours, you won't miss anything. Any of the stuff going forward we'll pick up right here in July of 1876 on the next episode of 1,000 Hours. For all of you listening, I thank you so much for your support. And again, if you would like this program to continue, greatly encourage you to go to whenitwascool.com and sign up for our Patreon. That's the most important way we have of monetizing and staying in business. We have other things I'd like to encourage you to do as well. I seldom tell you about our Facebook page, Carl Stern, the When It Was Cool Facebook page. We have an eBay store as well. We have lots of stuff in. You can check all that out from the front page of whenitwascool.com. Hope you'll visit us, check it out, bookmark it, and support us. All right. For everyone listening, thank you so much for joining me. For Patreons, hang around. We're going to hang out for a few more minutes right after this. And I will see you here again soon with a new show.
WhenItWasCool.com is your source for the best in retro pop culture. When It Was Cool features articles and podcasts on retro TV and movies, toys, action figures, pro wrestling, food, video games, and more. Hit the Patreon button to support us and get instant access to hundreds of premium podcasts and features. Family friendly and fun. WhenItWasCool.com.